I was on my way to the Reagan Library to speak to 850 people when I heard the news, and I told those people, and pretty unsteadily I might add, something that I had only first consciously realized on the drive out, namely that all the names I'd chosen for my work, things like Afterburner and Firewall and Eject, I'd chosen because I'd wanted to be like him. And then yesterday, when the sadness had ebbed a little, I wrote on my Facebook page that he'd been my hero since I was old enough to understand what the word meant. Neil Armstrong died last Saturday, and I can say that I was alive when Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, and Neil Armstrong walked this earth. Joining me now to celebrate who, in my mind anyway, had been the greatest living American are Steve Green and Scott Ott. Welcome, fellas. Guys, if you had gone to Central Casting, I don't know how you could have done any better, how you could have improved upon the man chosen to be the first human to walk on the moon. Even his name, Armstrong, was iconic and all-American. Steve, if humanity does thrive and explore the solar system and even the stars someday, you can make the case that Neil Armstrong was the most famous man that ever lived. And yet he lived his life in utter humility and grace. You didn't see him on Dancing with the Stars or Living with the Armstrongs or hawking product on TV. I think I admire that almost as much as I admire his accomplishments.
Yeah, you know what? Apollo, I'm not belittling the achievements. Good Lord. We sent 12 men to walk on the moon and return them safely to Earth. But Apollo, Earthside, was a real dog and pony show. They put these astronauts through the publicity ringer. And you know what? I rewatched The Right Stuff this weekend, and there's a really poignant scene. I think it's towards the end. We've been watching, you know, the Mercury guys, the Gemini guys, who had really been the pioneers into orbit and figuring out how to do all these things that were going to make Apollo possible. And towards the end, NASA brings up the Apollo guys. The Gemini and Mercury guys are promptly nearly forgotten, while these guys who didn't do all of these things, all these risky test astronaut things, are suddenly given this same amount of publicity and you know, hagiography and all that. And I think Armstrong hated it. And when he had done the amazing, wonderful, awe-inspiring thing that he did, that was done. He was done with the dog and pony show, and what a guy not to get drunk on that.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, Scott, you know, Neil got the first moon landing because of his coolness under pressure. After he flew Gemini 8 to the first ever space docking, a stuck thruster started them spinning out of control at about 60 RPM, and he got it back under control and landed safely. And you were telling me on the conference call we do before the show about a story you'd heard. It's one of my favorites. Do you want to tell us about that real quick?
About the lunar landing?
Yeah.
Or the test thing
the
with
simulator,
the simulator. You know, there's video of this, by the way. You can go to the Air and Space Museum website and see how they were flying this simulated lunar lander. And he was doing a wonderful job with it, but all of a sudden the thing started to just kind of loop out of control, and they had a leak of fuel, and the thing exploded in a ball of fire. He ejected out of it and wound up parachuting down essentially through the ball of fire that was created by the explosion when that thing hit the ground. And amazingly, an hour or so later, he was sitting at his desk in his office, and one of his colleagues walked by and said, hey, Neil, I just heard a funny story. And he said, what's that? He said, I just heard that the lander thing blew up and that you had to parachute out of it. You had to eject out of it. And but that can't be true because you're sitting here. And Neil said, no, that's true. And then he went back to his work. And you know, we don't have men that we hear about anymore like that, who go through incredibly dangerous things like that. And then they just realize it's part of their jobs. Now, we do have men like this. We just don't hear about them. A lot of them are in places like coal mines.
Yeah, that's right. Or airline pilots like Sullenberger. You know, Steve, President Obama issued a statement about the passing of Neil Armstrong, one of the greatest men who ever lived. And he accompanied it with a picture of the man Barack Obama thinks is the greatest man who ever lived, namely Barack Obama. There he is, staring up at the moon in wonder. Now, if Neil Armstrong was humble about great achievements, Barack Obama is what exactly?
Unhumble about his non-achievements?
That's good enough for me.
I remember how Obama marked the passing of Christopher Hitchens by telling the story of how the president bravely, very nearly quit smoking Newports. Like, this guy rode to the White House on a couple of memoirs that may or may not have been written about him, about people he may or may not have known or actually existed. He has to put himself in this place, otherwise there's nothing there but an empty suit. He knows it. He's a little tiny man.
Just reminded me of a comedy routine done by the funniest man in the world named Brian Regan, and he does a piece called "I Walked on the Moon." He'd love to have been an Apollo astronaut just so he could go to dinner parties and let everybody else tell their big stories that he could just close with "I walked on the moon." Scott, you know, he seems to have been such a wholesome and decent guy, Neil Armstrong. Even the statue of him at Purdue University, where he taught engineering for many years after he left NASA, doesn't show him in a spacesuit or standing there like Lenin looking to the bright horizon. He's just sitting there like a regular guy with a faint smile on his face. That's an amazing statue if you really think about it. Just look how casual and accessible that guy is. Isn't that how we want our heroes, Scotty? That's kind of how I wanted mine.
Absolutely. And you know, when it comes right down to it, he didn't go to the moon because he wanted to be a hero. He went to the moon because of why every little boy dreams of going to a place like the moon. Every child who has a sense of adventure in his heart does it because it's almost a yearning that can't be controlled, that you must do, something you have to press toward. It's what has made everything great that is great in the United States of America and around the world. And this guy was just, frankly, trying to live out the dream of everyone who has a heart and a soul that yearns for something greater. He did it in ways that most of us can't imagine. And Brian Regan is a genius, by the way, as a comedian. But that, you know, Neil Armstrong, who needs to crow? After you've stood on the surface of the moon, you don't have to say anything about it ever again.
That's right. We'll have more to say about this later, but for now, let me just say this. I read yesterday that no one born after 1935 has walked on the moon. Now, just think about that for a minute. No one born after 1935. The men who achieved the greatest summit of human skill and courage are old men now, and we can either watch them pass away from this world, or we can honor their memory in the only way that would matter them, by making new heroes from new young men and women and going places that they themselves had only dreamed about. We've got the model. We'll never live up to it. He was one of a kind. But like the moon, it gives us something to aim for. For PJTV, I'm Bill Whittle.